Okay. Well, so this is Chris DeLeon. Today's kind of an unusual setup, but I'm in a phone conversation now with Charles Zammit, who I'm not sure. Are you this way or are you this way?
I am to your left. I'm to your left.
This
Yeah.
way?
Yep. That
Nice.
way.
Okay.
Yep.
Charles over here. And Charles has been following the HobbyGameDev Kit as sort of my package for trying to. It's sort of exercises around code and some material about design, audio course about project leading. And part of that package includes some conference calls, some mentorship calls, which are kind of always different for everybody because it depends on what their situation is. And it's because like there's certain material you can kind of build off of as a general thing. At the end of the day, though, people's needs and opinions about things differ and goals differ. And so this is the first of our two conversations of this sort, which hopefully maybe we'll record the other one too in a month or two, in which we're going to try to establish and talk through and set up some goals, kind of talk about how things have been going so far in Charles's background and experiences so far with game development.
Right. So we did the email. So one of the first things you have on there is my current state of being, and honestly, I did finish the two games. I finished two projects, I guess you could say. A game with two parts to it, Constantine, my RPG, and it's been submitted to RPG Maker. But even after finishing the project, I feel like I'm good, not great. I would give myself a 6 out of 10 as far as my development. And that's just more of like an honest setting. That's not really like my I could, if I was to do things forever in RPG Maker, I'm perfectly fine with that. But I don't want to do that. I want to be able to do things in Unity. I want to be able to write my own stuff if I need to. Also, doing things in RPG Maker, their scripting system is very clunky. So many times I would be doing stuff in there and I'd be like, I'm doing this the hard way, and it's because that's what I'm relegated to. And I also don't really know what's it called, it uses Ruby on Rails.
Okay.
And I don't know the syntax and stuff and I don't know the program. I'm working with an engine, so things I can do could break the engine. So that's the other thing, delving into that.
Are there some specific limitations around its structure, or things that you wish you could do in it that you can't?
No, I mean, it's like, for instance, let's say that you want to do a choice, and you want to do a choice of 4 different things. Well, you can do that, but it's somewhat clunky to do it. So instead, what you end up doing is doing a if-else choice type of situation, which is Boolean math. So if I have 4 choices, I have to do an if-else, 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 if-else seeded within each one of them. And that gets super clunky, and it kind
of makes a big tree of logic.
It looks horrendous. It's very ugly to look at.
Gotcha.
But it works, and that's how I did. One of the events in the game, the original game, was there's going to be a temple that's going to be hit. It's going to have to be stolen from, and that's ethereal to the player. It's just basically one of the temples is stolen from, and the text changes for all the characters, and those are all switches, all controlled by switches. But in order to do that, it was like an if-else, if-else, if-else with 5 different temples and a random number being rolled at the top, and then I had to basically make it re-roll. I think I'd made it re-roll the random number if a temple had already been hit. So that way, every night that you decided to stake out a temple, one temple would get hit, and all that's just the player doesn't really necessarily know that's going on.
Yeah, and you can just feel it's kind of not the way that should be done. There's conceptually, because I mean, for that sort of thing. And so you said every night, different temple should be hit.
Right.
I mean, if you're programming from scratch, of course, you'd have you could start with kind of some indexes 1 through 5, randomly shuffle that list, and then each night take from a different one, and that'd be the one that'd be hit.
And then that turns on a global control switch, and that flips all the text, so that way you kind of get clued in. The different characters will be like, oh, my temple got hit, or I can't believe they stole from us, whereas the day before they'll be like, I don't think that our temple's going to get hit, or just different text, different things. I also felt that character development for me, I wasn't spending enough time doing that as well. I was spending a lot of time developing the different engines to do the different things I needed to get done within the game.
Gotcha. Now, I mean, so also particular to kind of RPG Maker is it's got a sort of a Super Nintendo era aesthetic.
Yeah, it's almost like Super Nintendo Plus because it's it just has a really nice look to it when you, if you're really good at pixel art. I did try my hand at a couple of pieces of pixel art this month. That was pretty fun. Built, basically, I went online and I found like a gelatinous cube that someone had made 32 by 32 and expanded that to 64 by 64. Added a bunch of parts onto it, and then I basically recolored some other ones.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, that was, but it takes time to do pixel art, like about 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours to do each one of those 3 different pieces of art.
Were those animated or were those static
yeah,
sprites?
animated. Yeah, animated in 12 frames. So I mean,
Gotcha.
it wasn't like horrible. I mean, like once you do the left facing, a lot of times that's the right facing too, so that helps save you some time.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely an experience. I definitely have a lot more respect for pixel artists.
For sure. Well, and it's also the kind of thing that you know, if as long as you can pick an art style that you can do in a high volume, often there are little tricks like even if you just half your resolution. I don't suppose RPG Maker is a handy way to do that. But in programming, if we're using sort of a pixelated friendly engine, Flixel or that kind of thing, we can just have our resolution, and it greatly speeds up the time we have to put out art. It reduces the complexity of our art at a low enough resolution, and not that you necessarily need to go like this far back into history styles. But it's almost like the distinction isn't, you know, the details as if it was like a portrayal of something real, but it's simply, can I tell this enemy from that enemy old enough in game history? That was kind of sufficient. And if art isn't your focus, I don't know, it's one of the ways to kind of help you keep your attention on the aspects you're trying most to learn right now, whether it's story development, character, whether it's you know, programming stuff from the ground up.
Box detection.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of a big deal.
Yes, but yeah, it's I think one of the general strategies I might be paying attention to and thinking about goals going forward is, you know, there's lots and lots of things to learn, but they can all be very hard to learn in tandem or sort of in parallel. And I think it's like if you can sort of identify what's the one thing you want to learn next, and it's not like that's the only thing you're ever gonna, like the last thing you're gonna learn, but as to like if you designed a project around something that's gonna really make you practice, you know, whether it's your character and storytelling, crafting, whether it's that you want to work with programming and game design aspects, trying to build up something kind of closer to your gameplay from an RPG Maker thing, but without RPG Maker, or if you want to exercise something like team management or pixel art, you know, there's various ways we could design a sort of a month or two goal around that in a way that really necessarily kind of cuts corners in some other areas in favor of focusing your attention on like that's what you're learning right now, and then you'll be better equipped when you kind of shift and you know you pick yourself a new target the month or two after that. And
I think that's what I kind of did for myself, like without even knowing it, with this last project, because the original project was heavy plotline, storyline. This one was more heavy combat.
Gotcha.
A lot of plot line, and I actually felt bad about that after the fact. I started throwing in random little like phrases where they're wandering around the village to be like, to make the player feel like there was something else going on to help direct them where they needed to go. But it was more heavy combat balancing. Of course, I added on somebody else's scripts, Victor scripts, to do all my combat, so I had little guys running around the screen instead of flashing pictures, which everyone likes.
Something like old Final Fantasy where we move forward and attack, or like
they actually
like
run
full
all
spatial.
The way up. They all actually run all the way up, and they'll hit them with. They use the icons as the weapons. And, there's rotations and different things. Like I started looking through the engine on, because it tells you how you can actually use the Victor scripts engine to make your own stuff, and it's basically rotation and different things on the weapons themselves, and how you have to basically they're centered on the player and all that type of thing.
Nice. So instead of having to animate the attack, it's kind of building the animation for you out of your 2D assets.
Yeah, out of your assets, which is pretty neat. Additionally, I added on I already had a death script for the main character where if he died, it ended the game immediately. And then I added on a death script for when your characters die, you can now turn on or turn off permadeath, where the characters, simply what happens is they just get removed from the party and there's no way to get them back. Because, yeah, that was what they did. And I added on like text where they're dying and the main character is like, why couldn't I save them, type of thing. So that was interesting.
Gotcha. Is RPG Maker the thing that you'd like to use for your next project, or are you?
I feel super comfortable with it. I probably need to push out, I think.
I mean, it's totally up to you. You know, there's people who make games in RPG Maker and they're perfectly happy with the output. There's certainly nothing wrong with it. For a certain, as long as what you want to build is the kind of thing that the engine outputs, the tool outputs, it is definitely a faster, more convenient way to do certain kinds of things.
Right.
Now that said, you know, if what you wanted was something that structurally in your RPG, it's totally not the way RPG Maker works. It just at a very deep level. Something I don't know if it might be like a more of a node-based map. I'm not sure if I've seen that in RPG Maker. If it's something where the combat works at a very fundamentally different way. I'm assuming I haven't spent a lot of time in RPG Maker, but I'm assuming it doesn't produce games like Zelda where you're kind of like striking in real time.
Well, you can. Yeah, you can do things like that. I've seen people talk about doing stuff like that. I've also seen people use it to make like a side-scrolling like battle game type of thing. Like I mean, it's based in Ruby, so you can do a lot in the engine. In fact, I was looking at like this month. One of my small goals for myself is I have children. I have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 9-month-old. And one of the things we do is we have Your Baby Can Read, and that the fundamentals of that is you have words. They say the word, and then you should be able to guess what the word is. Type of thing.
Oh, nice.
Help them learn things. So I was like, what? How can I do this in a game? And I was actually starting to work on it in processing.
Okay.
And I got kind of okay with it. I was getting the box to light up where I could click on it, and it was like a hit detection again was the problem.
Yeah. Was that the flashcard program you mentioned in the email?
Yeah, that was the flashcard program. I started working on it in there, and then like after finishing this project, I was like, man, I could do this so much more easily in RPG Maker because I already know how to do it. So
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, it is a very hard thing to wean yourself off of because it's like getting massive results with comparatively little effort. Not that it's low effort, I mean clearly, but for the quality of polished output you can get,
right.
It's quite a step back to begin kind of like from closer to a blank slate.
Right.
And of course, at the end of the day, I mean, some of the advantages is also like it can expose you to some more programming practice, some more proficiency with that. So then you can even maybe go back into RPG Maker and be better prepared for doing some more complex things with scripts inside of RPG Maker than you maybe were comfortable with before you had kind of pushed out to try to, write your own this, that, and the other.
And that's something I kind of wanted to bring up, which, I had the question later, but you talk a lot about how we do game programming more like you play music or like you do a sport. It's a practice. It's something you do. And for me, when I had people that would come up to me and ask me about playing guitar, because that's one of the things that I do, I would always tell them, well, it's best if you have something simple that you can do, that you start off with, because you get really good at that, and then as you push out and start doing other things, when you get frustrated, you can always go back to that. And so that's what I think I want RPG Maker to be for me, as something I don't want to become dependent on it, but at the same time, it's something like if I get super frustrated, but I still want to work on something, I can go right back to it and get results and get things done type of stuff.
Absolutely.
So I think that's something, I don't know, you might even think about adding to your program, is talking about that concept of having something simple that you can go back to build confidence, and then pushing out from there.
Yeah, and it's something that I think has evolved in some people's cases. Well, it's really common where someone will first bite off way more than they can chew on a project,
which is typical.
It is really typical, and it's like most people I talk to have had one of those stories where then they retreat from it and they go do something simpler. And it's become such a common thing that I've written some articles about like why that danger zone. Although when I wrote that, it's really about for people who are trying to invest a bunch of money in it. If they are trying to get funding, make a Kickstarter, pay people, etc.
They're pie in the sky in it.
Yeah, but if they're pie in the sky with their savings, that's where it gets scary.
Yeah.
But as long as they're kind of bootstrapping it, just kind of doing it in their free time to learn, they take off more than they can chew. I think there are some lessons that they learn from that. That then they start going back to like the smallest thing they can, and that's where they start to figure out like, okay, well I can do this, and so the next project I can do that +1 or +2, or I can incrementally kind of move my pieces forward. And I think it's also part of the nice thing about, like I mentioned with the, even just by virtue of you'll be learning every time you make a new episode, new project, that modular content is nice because it enables you to kind of reassess where you're at in terms of your art ability or in terms of the story, and kind of how you plan out these things in a way that once you start something, if it's all one single piece or one body, you're kind of committed to. There's an art style to be maintained. There's sort of a story that's for better or for worse, the one you kind of have to be consistent with.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, if Street Fighter 2 couldn't have happened if they just added fighters to Street Fighter 1. It's fundamentally they've changed some important stuff. And I think sequelizing or even just episodes can give you some freedom to, this time, something else appears.
Right.
Do you have, out of curiosity, like sort of a larger arc for what you're trying to build with your projects in the Constantine series? Like, is it planned as a series, or is it so far like one at a time, you think it up as you go?
It's kind of like, yeah, that's more or less what it is. It's more like I think it up as I go. The overarching thing that I want to bring, and I actually talked about this yesterday. I specifically pushed out a dev blog yesterday before this to kind of get my ideas out there, but the main character is trying to save the bad guy, like more or less, and that isn't really very clear right now, but later on, like, I want to have a redeemable bad guy, so I think the next episode will probably go into bad guy backstory is where I think I want to go right now, so that way we can like more humanize him and kind of get to feel where he's coming from and that type of thing. I think a lot of what we do in video games lately has been good guy or bad guy. It's like you are a good guy or you're a bad guy, and that's all you are.
Yeah.
And that's very that's not very realistic to a lot of the way the world works. I mean,
Sure.
There are definitely like bad parts and good parts to most people.
There's gray areas and rationale for bad guys, and even fantastic, clearly unrealistic television shows and movies have expected a higher level of maturity. Where, like, in zombie movies, there's always this conflict of like, oh, but that person was my sister, and now like I have to make a hard choice, and you get more invested in it because it's not in games sort of archetypical zombie or it's a hopeless demon just has to be murdered, and that's that. Also, it's like I say, I think it's going to be useful, at least maybe as a practice project, in thinking about how you can zero in on focus on what part you want to improve at, and like really kind of like hit that part on the anvil, whether it's programming, whether it's art, whether it's team management, or like character storytelling, and as part of that, if you kind of picture bars and raising that one bar, lowering down some of the others, it's something where if it's character and storytelling stuff that you're thinking about doing next. That would, I think like lend itself with RPG Maker.
Combat, I think that's where I really kind of want to go. The other interesting thing to me is my wife asked me the other day, she said, do you even enjoy playing your own game? And I thought about it, and I was like, well, I do to an extent, but at the same time I don't, because I know everything is going to happen. It's more enjoyable for me to watch somebody play an RPG that I've created, because I want to see what they find and what they don't find. And then how they react to the different, like, small little pieces of humor that I throw in, different, that's more enjoyable to me right now. But if I were to make a straight up combat game, one with random elements and stuff, that would have a little bit more replayability to me, and that would probably be more something I would want to play over and over.
For sure, and I think some of that's just fundamental to the genre, and that RPGs are often games of exploration or of content drip, where, like you say, if you've already seen it all, it's kind of like it's a story. You can have spoilers. In a way that more arcadey mechanics, combat systems, like you say, there's something else going on there, and also you can also randomize a lot more things in that kind of space. So even if you've built the randomization, you've built the procedural generator or whatever, even you don't know. Notch doesn't know what drops into his world.
Something like the Disgaea, something like that. A lot like that, where you had those random worlds.
Yeah. Now, is that something might be interested in trying out in terms of programming for a little bit of a combat system, sort of in isolation of and separate from the rest of RPG world and the rest of sort of the narrative progression? It could still even, at least conceptually or narratively, be connected to the world.
It doesn't really have to be. Yeah, like I think I want to put Constantine down for now. I think I really kind of want to put it down and try and move into other projects and kind of grow. Like we talked about through the email, Ogre Battle's always been a passion of mine, like playing that tactical game. I've played a lot of like Warhammer and that type of thing, and so I enjoy combat with units, where it is that you set up the units beforehand, and that's a big part of playing the game. And then movement is also a big part, flanking and that type of thing.
And those are tile-based kind of chessboard movements, right? I mean, it's still
in a way, it could be set up that way in a simplified way, but when you're playing the tabletop game, it's more you use rulers, and there's a little bit of give and take. So it would be more akin to, you would probably use floats, and you would give values for when it is that the units engage each other.
Sure, and it sounds like it's good. I mean, it's already like you're thinking through how you might go about doing this. And the thing I always try to encourage for practice projects, especially, because they take on a different nature than like a project you're trying to use to impress the outside world. It's kind of like, what's the minimum that you can build and still be learning what you're trying to learn.
Right.
And so in this kind of situation, like if it was just 2 different armies of a few different units, would you feel like you were still accomplishing some of the core learning you're going after learning in this kind of project, or would that, you think,
that I would definitely, I would definitely, like when I was starting off and I did exactly what you talked about, where I basically aimed too high and I was like, I'm going to make Ogre Battle, and in Unity 3D, and not really know that much about Unity 3D, which takes a lot of reading, because you got to get into the dev documents, because you got all the little like if you're using like transform, like you have to know like transform dot this dot that, all the different things to understand what's going on in there. And just getting the camera movements and being able to click on stuff and then move things was not really happening for me. Like I barely got that to work, and it wasn't working to the level that I wanted it. So for me, it would be enough for me to design a game where I could simply click on a unit, move it, and then have it engage another unit. I think that would be a good starting point.
Nice. Just sort of RPG style control.
Or RTS.
I mean. Yeah.
And then I did check out your RTS project, but I felt like even that was like, I started going through the code on it, and I was like, this is beyond me right now.
Fair enough.
It really was.
It's kind of the most complicated one out of the set in terms of the range. Gotcha. And is that something you'd want to be doing in Unity or in processing?
I mean, I guess it would probably be easier to do it on a 2D plane, so processing would probably be better for me right now, but eventually I'd like to do it in Unity. And eventually it would be nice to even, like, this Ogre Battle concept, to maybe have it on some sort of mobile or iOS device, because I think that would play well. Because what you want to do, like, one of the biggest games that does well on the mobile devices seems to be some sort of tower defense, in which case you're basically making decisions and then you watch what happens. And that's exactly what this game is. It's like, I move a unit here and then we'll see what happens.
For sure. That works out great, because in a way that, in action games, your finger, your hand's always partly covering up stuff. In that turn-based stuff, never an issue.
Right.
It's kind of easier standing in a line, and if someone says something to you, then you can take your head away from it for a moment and not lose instantly.
Right.
For sure. Well, and that's, of course, the beautiful thing about Unity is once you've built in Unity, the same thing on your computer, you run it on your mobile device. But I do think you got kind of the right approach there. I've had even fairly proficient friends in programming who they'll prototype something in processing just because it's a way to slap things together. It can get results very quickly. It doesn't require the same sort of untangling of some 3D math, or sort of figuring out what's Unity's way to trick this into doing. So when I click on a thing, that's the one.
Right.
And so they can just sort of get it stood up.
With ray casting, right? Pretty much.
Yeah. It's ray casting from the camera, and that's even one of those things where it's not as though I poured through the API documentation and figured it out. It's like when I first needed to do it, I found someone's script that was kind of like that. I borrowed a few lines, and ever since then, when I need to do it, I open up my mech game that I have using for like firing the laser, and I pull that piece and I adapt it to it somewhere else, because it's like a full loaded line of world, viewport, casting, and transform changes, and I want to click on a thing, and it's just what I'm trying to get done.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's painful sometimes when you're like, you just can't get it to work.
Yeah, and like I said, it's absolutely amazing for certain kinds of things. And if nothing else, it's portability to platforms. My other friends, John Nesky, he uses Unity, not even like for its 3D layout, level editing, like most of us tend to do. He just does all of it in programming and uses Unity like his compiler, and then his code is what's creating all the objects and moving everything around, responding to touches. Sort of taking it to another level. If he's just using Unity to get the same game on Android and iOS,
Oh, I see.
which
Right, yeah, to port it out. That makes sense.
yeah, because really anything you do in that layout editor you can do in code. It's just the layout editor is a great way to visualize and fit things together if you're working like in a 3D architected space
It's
or
funny
whatnot.
too because a lot of my players that my test players are like, man, I really wish I could play your RPG on my mobile device.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's so small. The pixels on it is 640 by 480, and that's hard coded in. You can't make it any bigger.
right.
So it would translate decently well to mobile devices.
Sure, yeah. I mean, well, it's also it's nice that you can upscale that stuff on a mobile device through Unity or something very easily in terms of basically adjusting camera parameters, um, for sure. Now, I wonder if there's kind of a two-stage in that as to, or if you feel like it might be too much. It partly depends if you want to have our follow-up call in a month or in 2 months. Either one, kind of up to
It'll
you.
probably be in 2 months. I mean,
Okay.
like right now, everything that's on my plate is I'm starting my class, so I am working on my bachelor's in science. But unfortunately,
Awesome.
because of the way the funds worked out, like my first class doesn't have anything to do with computers. It's like intro to the school.
Gotcha.
So that starts on the 7th. But that's fine because I'll be going to Gen Con in Indiana
Okay.
to do that, and working with some of the people I'm looking at trying to get into their company. So I won't be working with them directly, but I'll be around them, and I do a lot of community stuff for them.
Nice.
So yeah, I'll be out there basically doing a lot of, I guess, networking, which is part of the what I want to do this month. Some of my goals for this month are like build a website for my stub company, Lancer
Nice.
Games. Create some business cards, so I'll have them to pass out to people when I'm at the convention.
Good call.
And I'm not sure if I wanted to create a resume or not. I'm really not in a job career looking like time frame right now, but I kind of wanted to talk to you about that, see what your feelings were, if like I really should have a resume or not right now.
I would absolutely recommend making it. So it's one of those things like just the same story actually for a website where by the time you need it, you want to have it already made, for one, and for two, like it evolves so well with iteration. It's really going to show if like you get one as soon as you can in terms of just getting one together, and it's also going to help you capture your old details, think about it. That'll give you time to kind of go away from it, come back to it, feel partly embarrassed at how you worded the objective statement, like we all do the first time or two.
Right.
And it just makes you concretely start thinking about like what trajectory am I on, what am I pointing to, what would I like to have, filled in on here in the future. I think it's a really healthy exercise, and ultimately it can take a lot of time, but it's one page, and I think it's a great investment of your time to get that down sooner rather than later and get that started.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so that's pretty much it there. And then I wanted to just build that educational word game for my son, which I can pretty much do right now. I just have to find some quiet time so I can say all the words. I was thinking about like that with the words themselves. If there was an easy way, like an algorithm that could just do like speak and spell style, say the words.
So say the word. Now there probably are some voice libraries you might be able to connect to it. I mean, so that's the sort of thing where we tend to, like, the amount of actual work involved in doing that is astronomical. But there are people who build
like
libraries.
50 words. I mean, we're not talking
Yeah.
time.
Well, yeah. I mean, if it's your own speech, you can of course record every word. That's going to be the also the most personal outcome given the family nature of the project. But as far as like the automated text to speech, there are libraries and things that they definitely exist in C#. Through Microsoft stuff, I'd imagine they exist in some sort of Java thing. There's hooks too, but sometimes they work in roundabout ways where like you can send a message to a server of what word you want. The server generates the audio, sends you back a file. You've got to load and play that file.
That would be later on if I decided to like produce this and push this out to some sort of mobile device or something.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. But text to speech is one of those things. It's like a lot of web technologies. Someone's cracked that problem in a way that you can actually tap into like their existing resources and platform in a way that just it takes such a team and research effort to pull this kind of thing off internally.
Yeah, I downloaded the Windows mobile app creator thingy.
Okay.
I haven't played with it yet. I mean, have you had any good experience with that? Or
I don't know anything about that yet.
Yeah, it's for the Windows Phone.
Okay.
I think. So I don't know. I'm not too sure about it. It would be just another like different direction to go, and I'm trying to focus.
Yeah.
So
it's always tempting because there are dozens of different things you could be doing at any given time.
Right.
But if you pick one or two and get deeper in it, it's probably gonna And like I say, it's just like when you're transitioning between a practice project where you're trying to learn, like, okay, the programming is focused right now, not story, not art, not team stuff. Um, at the end of the day, you can then shift your gears to some other direction, and the programming part like stays with you. And so it's just like when you go in deeper on a single platform before you shift your attention back to, Windows Phone or something else, you'll be better equipped to do so from the time you got deeper into, I think, maybe processing or Unity or.
Yeah, I think I mostly just wanted to do it just to see what the experience was like. I think most of the time, most of the projects I'm doing right now are just for the experience of doing it. But at the same time, it's a lot easier for me to focus when I'm actually interested in it. Like like it's somewhat difficult to work on some of the hobby game dev material when I know it's just for practice and no one's really going to play with it. So some of the other goals I had, besides learn mobile app development, create my own 2D / music asset library. And so I thought about that, like, as I was going through this project, and I was like, man, there's all these assets, and everyone has, basically has the same accesses that I do if they paid for them, $20 basically. And you can recolor things and do other stuff, but like the 2D art, I was getting a little bit faster at, I noticed, and I also noticed that with RPG Maker. And then my own music assets. I think it would just be good for me to have my own proprietary stuff that no one has access to. But that, of course, takes time. But at the same time, it could be one of those things where if I'm not developing, I can do that for a little while, for like a month.
Yeah, and that's a fine way to shift gears. A lot of people, when they have sort of motivation sort of challenges or they're not as passionate about one thing or the other, I encourage them to procrastinate one productive thing by doing something else productive, and that's totally an area for that kind of deal. But yeah, it's like default anything or shared resource anything tends to stand out, which is like if you were doing a PowerPoint deck and you use like one of the built-in Microsoft things, even if the rest of the presentation is fine, like people just read into that in a certain way. And having your own art assets, even if they are not technically as shiny as the stuff you can pay to get that's kind of more generic, if they're really your own and they all kind of match and there's a certain style to them, I think it'll help your stuff kind of stand out as being much more kind of homegrown. It'll speak to your ownership over what you've made.
Right, and that means the assets will hopefully look similar too.
Yeah, just coming from the same hand, and that's one of those nice things about small teams where the huge team, it's actually part of the artist challenge that they all have to like work at a similar constraint stylistically, versus when you're doing everything as one person, it's all going to match. It's all going to be your approach to doing things.
Right, for sure.
Even if simpler.
So, I guess one of the other big things I wanted to talk to you about was the team stuff this past month. So I don't know if you may or may not have known, but basically I tried to put together a team at the beginning of the month.
Yep, had 4 people originally.
Including myself. I basically had 2 of them were my brothers, and one was a person that showed some interest.
Nice.
And nobody produced anything.
Right.
Which happens a lot.
It totally does. And totally normal. Now, I think what I would encourage, because I caught up on part of your video blog from the RPG Maker Contest project. Mm-hmm. It sounded like after they hadn't done anything, like within the first week or whatever, you just kind of had to let them go. That's something where I've actually, in a lot of my projects, whether students, whether hobby stuff, even online collaboration things, I've just sort of accepted and expected most people won't do anything in week 1. Right. When they're not being compensated commercially and their only involvement is like that they're putting in stuff, I think they always need to see they need to see a bit of the momentum from me as far as like a week or 2 of my chipping in stuff, and then they can get more excited about it. They start to see it make changes, and they can start to see themselves as to being like, I could be a part of those changes, and it gets to be more closer to something that they want to be in on, versus when it's just kind of early. I think it's harder for them to kind of see it as a thing that's evolving.
I might have put it too much on other people, is what you're saying. Because like what I did was I opened it up for the plot line. That was probably the biggest one. I didn't say here's the plot line we're doing. I said if you guys have a plot line you want to do, get it in by this such and such date. If not, we're going to do my plot line.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I think you might have heard in some of my other stuff, but of like tentative clarity of having a direction we're moving in, and things can be changed, things can come up and be discussed for alteration. But I think it helps people get on the same page, because otherwise they're not sure which toes they're stepping on, what's defined yet or not. And like I said, I think just also them seeing it kind of progress a week or 2 And I realize that's really tough in the case of this was like a 1 month
Yeah, it was like
deadline.
1 month. Yeah.
So you kind of don't have as much give as if it's a multi-month project. Um,
Yeah,
but
for
yeah,
the most part, like I just basically like once it got to week 2 and I didn't see any products from anyone, I just basically pulled it back into my realm. And I felt like week 1 I just wasted so much time chasing people down, explaining what was going to happen, going through everything because it's like 3 different phone calls.
yeah.
It's not like there was like a team meeting and no one was physically here. So I think there was just a lot of issues. And in the future, I think if I decide to do something like that again, first of all, I'll probably just require people to have either a project or some sort of work within like maybe 3 days, 4 days or something. Otherwise, they'll know that basically if they don't have anything, then they're not contributing and they're off the project type of thing. I mean, I feel like that's somewhat reasonable.
Yeah, again, I don't know. It depends on the total time frame you've got to work in, but I always try to give people a week or two
Right.
in terms of letting them see kind of how things are progressing, how I'm managing things. And it's also because very early on in a project, often it's harder for them to make tangible contributions in terms of if they have a piece of content, even if they made a sprite, we wouldn't have a place to put it yet, depending on how the project's taking shape. And as it gets kind of closer to completion, we actually either wind up with kind of increasingly number of positions of like, we don't have a song for this level. Could you make a song for this level? And then they can very concretely see, here's what I'm making my music for, here's what I need this for, as opposed to like trying to get on the same wavelength of other people on the team who they don't know what's coming out of them either. It's just one of these things where like progress allows more progress, and so I tend to try to be extra forgiving early on in terms of what their comfort is with the project. And it's always hard because there's so much detail that we have to share about the project and about we're trying to get them on the same page, but that gives them like a book to read, and it can be kind of intimidating at first. And I think that as they play a couple of builds of it, a couple of increments of, even if it's just me alone, or in the case of kind of you alone chipping in on it, it helps them more concretely see it as the program, as opposed to these floating ideas as to like, well, which part of that's going to make it, and like how are we going to do this, and how much gets done in a week, and
Right.
it's always really hard, and it's the nature of volunteer contributors. It'd be very different if everybody was on salary or something, but you got to figure out, I guess, ways as much as possible to make it as easy for them as possible. To, like I say, I'm always happy to get people involved any way I can. Tim Westcott, one of our hobby game dev people, he made Swing It. I think he didn't have anybody on the project until like the last week.
Wow.
But he just kept pushing along week by week, making progress on it. And then basically he had other people who volunteered. They're like, hey, I might make some sprites, I might do this, I might do that. Many of whom fell through. But
Right.
so then I was like, well, heck, I can make some sprites. And then so like overnight, because he was comfortable with me coming in kind of late, project totally transformed how it looked. And then once it transformed how it looked, then someone else was like, well, actually, hey, I can make some levels. And so he had someone else make a level or two for it. And it was really that kind of early on in the project, he was like, hey, we're going to make a grappling hook game in Unity. And people, if nothing else, thought, like, it sounds really hard and time consuming, and I'm not hard to see. There's a million ways I could go. And the later it gets into the project, the fewer directions it could go, because it's increasingly kind of like, it's increasingly painting itself into a corner of like, well, we've got loose ends to tie up, we've got some stuff to fill in. And it's one of those nice things that I guess to a degree RPG Maker probably should do this already. But like for art, when we can just hand someone a file and be like, here's the current art we have in there as placeholder, you can just paint over it, save it, and send it back to me. It's in the game immediately. Right. Really helps versus like, if you ask them like, I need an animated character that's 32 by 32, and they're like, it's much harder for them than here's some stickman poses, paint over that, and send it back to me. But
yeah, I do remember seeing your dev blog on that, where you were talking about how you had tried your first hand at like doing some pixel art there,
some animations
and stuff. And yeah, it takes some time to get used to, but yeah, it's one of those things, you practice it and you get better at it.
Yeah, well, and the other thing to remember about project team management stuff is that just like design, just like programming, just like composing music, I mean, producer is a full-time role in a studio. Like that managing a team is in itself very much a skill that's got its own nooks, crannies, attitudes, values, and it's got to be, like you said, you spend like a whole day kind of running around and making different calls and stuff. it becomes a full-time job for people when it's done a certain way at a certain level. And so kind of like these other things, just like, we find ways to scale back our art so we can get our game done at all. We find ways to scale back and make some compromises stories so we can make a game at our scale at all. With the team management stuff, it's often like, are there some ways I can kind of do things super on the cheap in terms of like just emails to all once a week is something I do for my Light Hook project. I've seen a lot of teams use Trello. I don't know if you're familiar with that as a tool.
I'm not.
Trello is great. Trello is like a shared whiteboard that people can kind of join into, and it's like Post-it notes and you can put on it, and you can assign them, and there's kind of lanes for like basically I think kind of brainstorm level versus like kind of someone needs to pick this up versus here's who's working on it versus a completed column. And so you can kind of just touch base once a week and figure out, okay, is anyone going to pick up this, or can I tentatively assign that to Jim? It just becomes this very clear border. Someone can check and see, okay, what are my tasks? What can I do? Mark it off. And it's a free tool. At least it certainly was last time I used it, maybe 5 months ago. Hopefully it still is. But it's been a really, really a wonderful thing for small teams to try to recreate some of that same experience of when a big real studio gets the 8 people in a room every morning and they try to figure out who's doing what that day. It doesn't all have to happen at the same time. It can be tentative. Anybody can rearrange their cards or mark them as done. It's, I think, a really handy tool to reduce the amount of phone calls and running around that has to happen just to keep things on track.
So, I guess the only other thing I had that I can think of right now is the game dev club type environment, and I don't know of one in my area. I don't really want to talk about where I am on the internet exactly, but I looked into some different things, and I think it was the one that you have advertised on HobbyGameDev. I emailed, who was it? I forget.
Ron.
Ron, yeah, I emailed Ron. He talked about how I would need to do like weekly meetings if I wanted to be like affiliated with them and stuff like that. And as someone that's already a content producer that does a weekly show on Fridays, plus like I have like other commitments, and I'm a father, and I'm trying to do this. It just felt like it's not leading a whole like thing wasn't going to be in the cards for me.
Fair enough.
Like maybe if I didn't have the family commitments, then maybe. Obviously you did it somehow. You went to college, and then you also ran the club at the same time while producing your own games.
I mean, I'd also had a bit of a head start. Right. And it's something where I obviously only your family, and I don't have kids at this point or whatever, but I know for a lot of people, the people they have close in their life, like really we can in our mind it can feel like, oh, I'm losing time to it, but you get so much energy from it, and I think that in itself could be kind of like an exciting thing. It's like even this flashcard program you've been able to make, partly inspired by your kids will be able to use it, is kind of awesome.
Right.
And so, but as far as like club involvement, so that's part of why I created this thing at our Hobby Game Dev, and we currently only have 2 projects going for the summer. It's the Light Hook thing and the one of the Herd game by Tim Waskett, who did the Swing It game. But it's trying to recreate a little bit of that structure in a way that you don't necessarily have to have the club locally. Everyone collaborating is remote. Even though it's only 2 projects being led, I think Waskett's got a few people on his team. I know I've got about 10 people in our weekly emails as to making models and making levels and stuff. So if you're interested in like farming out some team projects there, I'd be happy to work with you by email about trying to like coordinate some stuff and see what we can get some people on board for. Just kind of depends on what you're building. Because the other side to that is that even though you can always make bigger things with other people involved, if your focus point is I'm trying to learn how to do a particular thing, I think it can often be helpful to do it alone, because you've got to there's no part you can hand off. There's always in the collaborator situation room for weakness to develop where someone else is filling in. At a certain scale, it's kind of inevitable. But if the goal is to like really fit all the pieces together, there's a certain, I think, learning that happens at the end as an essential thing when you this is like at school stuff. If the project you hand in is all by you knew how every bit of it worked.
Right.
So I don't know if that might be a thing to maybe postpone. You could look at maybe doing kicking something off next season after the summer ends as an online collaborative project there, and we'd probably have some more momentum there as well in terms of more people involved.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I was looking also at the college courses and different things, and so I was trying to figure out like how important the Hobby Game Dev club would be, or like how beneficial. Like I was trying to weigh it.
Yeah.
That was the big question mark I had.
It's certainly in the interviews that I talk with other developers for the podcast I've been preparing. They'll often emphasize that even if somebody's going to like a game committed school like Digipin or like Full Sail, it's really the work they do outside of the classroom that helps set their stuff apart. And at the same time, like the certification in the network is valuable, helps them. They learn certain skills that way. But at the end of the day, like everyone coming out of school has that as a baseline, and what's helping to set them apart is like here's the projects I made, and if it's stuff that they've always only done alone, it doesn't show necessarily as impressively as the bigger things that can come out of a longer time frame. More people kind of with their hands in the pile, collaborating, working together, and it's partly because the people if someone's looking to get a job at a company as opposed to just go off and do their own thing, then they're really looking for someone who knows how to work with others, collaborate,
Right.
make some compromises in their own vision, fit their work around a spec that maybe partly came from someone else. And teams just demonstrate that in a way that no amount or even level of independent work can. But that
So,
said, I mean, yeah,
right.
I think it's a valuable thing to try to figure out some way to at least work in some sort of equivalent, even if it's a smaller scale thing or just you and some friends or whatnot. Now, I'll also say part of why, because I helped establish the process for Game Creation Society and I started VGDev, partly because the people that I needed to work with weren't necessarily the same people who were my friends.
Right.
I was in a fraternity as an undergrad. I knew lots of human beings. Out of those 65, 80 people in a given year, maybe 2 or 3 were also in my game development club. Most of the people I worked with, I would not have met if it weren't for this sort of more like pseudo-professional environment where everyone's only reason for being there was they wanted to make stuff in a way that, like I say, I would try to get people from my floor involved, try to get my friends involved, and I don't know, their interest would wane in a way that was different than if someone kind of went out of their way to take part in these kind of groups. So I think there's something to be said there for and forming those teams that can be they might be stronger if you can kind of find some way to get people under the same flag.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, all those things make sense to me. So probably for me, it probably will work best to try to hop on some of these projects on Reddit with some of your groups. In fact, I was pretty stoked. You were like almost immediately with the email, you were like, "Oh, well, here's something you could be doing with us right now." I was like, "Whoa, you really consider me? You just barely, basically just met me." So, so that was actually that was a confidence builder
Yeah, yeah.
in of itself.
When it's partly because all these projects that we do in that environment, it's what I'm used to from the college clubs is like we assume nothing of people joining the team, and they can kind of grow and fill in as much as they can learn, as much as they can do. But we're like basically there's kind of a process built around it where someone isn't really put on a core dependency, critical, like deep task blocking other people. I can kind of take care of that stuff as a project lead. And meanwhile, anybody who wants to take a shot at building some objects, some characters,
Right.
help us out with the writing, whatever the particular game demands, we can work those into the process. And as a fallback, we've always got some tentative plan, which is not as good as someone committing their energy to it, but the game will get done. And I think that's also it's just a really important part of that too. That certainty of this project will get finished helps people have some more confidence to chip into it, as opposed to worrying that like am I shoveling my work into a black hole, which is always a risk with
Right.
the internet collaboration going on.
Yeah.
My very first experience with a team project was actually internet collaboration gone wrong. Might have been like the year 2000, but I was working with it was a programmer using Game Maker in Norway or something, and I was just doing the 3D art for it. About 80% of the project, he lost the entire project. He had no backup. He had no anything, and so it just stalemated, finished at like 80%. Wasn't releasable state. It was buggy. My art couldn't go anywhere else. It was kind of like built specifically for that game, and I was like, ah. So it was a long time before I tried that again. But I've kind of learned from that and tried to bake that into my process here. Of I do lots of external backups ever since, and I try to not be that guy to get people on board, and then the ship sinks. So, but yeah. But actually, I mean, I do want to bring it back to thinking concretely about like what it is that you want to be building or doing, or so if you can imagine a month or two from now, let's say 2 months. What's something you'll have finished in terms of it's working? It's maybe not the most impressive thing in the universe, but like you built it, you met your goal, in the process you had to figure out or learn how to do something that you want to know how to do. And I think I know what it is, but I want to hear it come from you rather than just lay it
Yeah,
out.
I mean, like I said, it would be nice to just build a simple RTS where like I can click on a unit and it can engage another unit. Like that would be awesome. Just to
Nice.
have that. That would be, yeah, and doing it in processing and maybe doing it in Unity. That would be nice to have.
For sure. Now, one of the things that we might be able to do, so the write from scratch steps, you'll remember as part of like the Hobby Game Dev Kit stuff. Most of those games come with like a series of if you're gonna write this from scratch in processing, first do this, then do that, and it's always stuff like make the screen a certain size, put a rectangle on the screen,
Yeah,
have
I
it
did
change
the one
color
for the Pong.
Yep.
Pong? Yeah, not Pong. The
well, a tennis game. I mean, Pong is a trademark owned by Atari, so
right.
yeah. But so if you want to follow through those right from scratch steps in processing for the RTS game, even just like maybe as deep in as you need to get one unit attacking another unit, that could be a starting point. And that could also
even
be
just that engagement would be good because then I can just link it to the combat. You know?
Yes,
that's all
absolutely.
that needs to happen.
Yeah. And then that's something too where I'll be on the same page if you have questions and you can be like, okay, I'm stuck on step 8. I'll know exactly what that is. I'll be able to kind of show you a solution for that sort of thing. And it's also something that part of the nice thing about the kit stuff is like I'm able to focus my attention on certain people's needs. I can turn my attention partly to doing sort of a minimal RTS tutorial deal in processing and/or in Unity if you'd like. Of course, I'll show all people out there to see my YouTube channel and stuff.
Oh, for sure.
But that can help. This can help shape my direction. If you'd like to see that sort of thing in Unity, I'd be happy to stand it up as one of the example projects.
Yeah, I think that would be nice to have eventually is Unity, but it probably won't be immediately necessary.
Sure.
I'm still debating on whether I want to do the whole like switch screen thing or not for the combat, but probably not. I'm thinking.
Switch screen meaning
like in the original game, what they used to do is like once you engaged, they would say fight it out, and then it would swap to like a battle screen, and then you would go back to the main map. Which is like that's an epidemic with early RPGs in general. Like switch to combat screen, switch back.
Yeah, or of course like games like Link 2, where you would teleport into a whole other side view platforming area, and then Now that said, of course, part of what's great about that is that allows you to prototype like the combat situation
by
system.
Itself.
Yeah, totally separate from the challenges of designing an overworld and a cityscape and regions connecting together narratively and any of that other it allows you to kind of treat it as closer to Advance Wars. If I was just making an Advance Wars game, because it's got certainly its own set of challenges and issues. And since it's just be a processing prototype, I think it might be a fine angle to be thinking of it as just the combat thing as a separate deal. And then you could always also attack the RPG space as a separate deal. That's part of what's great too about having used RPG Maker. Once you get stood up in Unity, or processes however to keep it, a way to lay out your spaces, you've already got some practice at designing some towns, dealing with some dialogue decisions, tuning some stuff at that scale, in a way that a lot of people just don't have that practice or experience yet.
Right.
So I think that's nice, and that also means it's some kind of thing you can kind of put in your pocket as a thing you are comfortable enough with for now, while you shift your attention to the combat system, the more ogre battle, minimalist RTS stuff of click on a unit, command it to move, click on a unit, command it to attack, one unit dies, kind of deal.
Sure.
Yeah. Nice. And is there any other things that either like you've observed in your own development, or that you're thinking about, or is kind of on your mind about?
No, I mean I've had some interesting thoughts about different concepts. Like a lot of times I really enjoy driving my car, like most men, and so I was like, man, why do car games suck so much? Why do I not enjoy playing a car game? And I came to like some sort of understanding that no car game does it from a first-person driver's view, where it is that you can actually look around the cab of the car. And I think that could be interesting to do in a game. Just that by itself. Being able to basically, like, say you had an Xbox controller and you needed to check your right mirror, well, you would push the B button for that. You need to check your left mirror, you would do the X button. You need to check your rear view mirror, you use the Y button, and it would change your view to those different directions. And then you could use maybe like the A button to look behind. And that by itself would change the way car games play.
Yeah, I know it's certainly some flight sim games have done those sort of things where you can like look around in the cockpit, but in games and driving games it tends to be kind of a fixed view.
It's
maybe
usually a third person view, which is unrealistic to
well,
cars. And part of the reason why it's fun to drive a car is because there are things that you understand that the traffic should be doing, hopefully, that they aren't running into you, and you know where things should be. With a third person view, it makes everything way too easy.
yeah. Well, I mean, the third person view, just from a like sort of mechanics perspective, it's trying to recreate that sense of that spatial awareness that in real life, like you say, we get from the rapidity which we can like check a rear view, our broad, much broader field of vision in real life. So in some ways, it's like if you're in first person view in driving games, because you often switch into it. Without that freedom to move the camera around, it's kind of like you're driving while trying to like look through a shoebox, and it's
Exactly.
you lose your spatial awareness of like if someone's coming up against you, from the left side in a car,
You
I
hear
think
it.
yeah, and so that third person view is kind of a big cloge band-aid trying to simulate that feel of like, okay, I know what's right next to my car, it's like I really would, but the way they accomplish it, like you say, is maybe not as interesting as the inside view. Now, one of the things you might consider for that kind of direction is had a friend, Holden Link. He made a really interesting game called SMS Racing,
Hmm.
and it's a racing game where like you keep getting text messages and the phone keeps coming up on the screen, and like you have to respond within 5 seconds by clicking on the buttons, and like naturally like you start banging into the walls, and it's really hard to do, and it's an anti-driving and texting game. But he just took an existing driving game demo, at least as I understand it, from Unity that he kind of found out there, and like added the SMS thing to it. Got a lot of attention. It's perfectly legit. I mean, it's not like he's claiming that he built the car models and designed the environments, or whatever. It's kind of a known tutorial, I believe. But that might be the kind of thing where, since we're interested in exploring is car and camera movements, you might be able to find yourself kind of an existing car tutorial as a starting point,
Right.
and then focus on, okay, what you're really interested in is camera stuff. How can you play with that, and what are the buttons you map it to, and so on. But I think that'd be a great thing to put a little further down the pipeline. Unless, of course, if you're really feeling it at the moment, jump into it. That's a good way to drive your stuff.
Yeah.
But
Again, that would probably be something you would definitely want to do in a 3D environment like Unity. And I'm
Yep.
still like super, like my last two Unity bouts have not been great. So I feel like I need to step back from Unity. So
yeah, no, and I'll also say, so I know one of the things you tried to do in Unity was pinball.
I tried, yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it my stuff. You might have, but I'm super sort of obsessed with pinball to a degree, or have a bit of a background in it.
Right.
It's actually a surprisingly hard thing to do in Unity. Like you mentioned, like it has a physics engine, so it's for natural reasons it would feel like a normal thing to do. But there's a lot of weird nuances in physics and the way rubber responds to steel and spin of a ball and so on that.
I was just trying to get flippers to move.
Sure.
That's all
sure.
I was trying to do. And I basically took cubes and then married them to each other, or whatever, parented them.
Yep.
And I tried to get them to move, and I couldn't get them to move in a flipper direction.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. Making objects animate properly is just difficult for me right now.
Gotcha. I mean, because I can show you. I guess what I'm saying in the case of pinball, like even if you got those flippers, and I could show you how to do flippers if you'd be interested. It would still be like the next thing would be an even bigger brick wall and bigger brick wall. If making pinball work in Unity is much harder than I think it sounds like it would be, just for some weird physics reasons. As to with Unity has, of course, a general physics engine for rigid bodies, and pinball's got extremely quirky physical behaviors due to like the waxed wood and the steel ball and, like I say, rubber rings and all kinds of other weird stuff in there.
Make it realistic. I also thought it would be interesting to make the pinball game like modular, so that way you could actually have players that could build their own machine. That would be fun.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Future Pinball.
No, I'm not.
Possibly. So Future Pinball is sort of precisely that. It is a pinball enthusiast engine. It is something that was originally developed just kind of a standalone game. I think it comes with one or two tables, but lots of people have kind of made their own tables. It's even actually used as a level design exercise, and I want to say maybe NYU. I'm going to feel bad if I got the guess wrong because this is on video, but basically it's like, each student have to come up with their own pinball theme and like design the art for it and design the layout of the table. And Future Pinball comes with like kind of a CAD looking editor where you can place the bumpers and you can place the rails and you can set up the rule systems with some sort of simplistic code.
Right.
Now that said, lots of other people have taken that same system, photographed all kinds of parts from real pinball machines, and made maybe not entirely legal recreations of commercial trademarked IP. So for some people, it's like a pinball emulator. And as someone with a pinball history and interest, I get the appeal of that. But you know, if your interest actually was in making pinball tables a fun thing to do, it's kind of like RPG Maker is a great way to turn out RPGs of a certain style. Future pinball would actually be a really grand way if you just wanted to, as an exercise, think through pinball table design. You know, it's a platform for that specific style of game.
Right. I mean, but this is going to take, like, this would be more at our level of, like, building a pinball machine, right? Like, more like a developer level, not really the general public where they could just snap things into place.
Yeah, there are some semi-intimidating tuning variables and options involved in doing it right.
I think
hairy.
what I was interested in was, like, creating something where someone, like the general public, could simply have, you know, here's 9 slots on a table, and go nuts. Put whatever you want to in those slots, and it'll create the pinball machine, and then you can play it.
It was actually I think it might have been like 1982 or something, but maybe Bill Budge. Again, I'm still trying to make all kinds of guesses off of my head. If this is right. But he was an EA designer. They made the pinball construction set,
Oh, okay.
and you could drag and bump it. Now that said, you know, we're talking 30 years ago. It was terrible by modern standards. But you know, I will also say if early EA believed in it, there's got to be something there to building your being able to snap together.
Well,
your
I mean, yeah, with casual games on phones and things. I mean, yeah, it would be a casual game.
Now, do you have kind of a notepad going of like these different ideas of like the car driving look around, the pinball table construction stuff?
I don't, but you know, they're just kind of like, they aren't really super interesting to me. They were just like passing thoughts mostly.
Yeah, I mean, even so, I would totally recommend, and it could be as simple as like a Google Drive doc where you can kind of go back to it and not risk it being on one computer. But I would totally recommend just writing this stuff down, not because it's like a grand idea that someday is going to be super important, maybe, but if nothing else, because I find writing down ideas that are distractions from what I'm currently doing helps me move past it, because then my brain doesn't feel like it needs to keep repeating it to not lose it.
Right.
It's like, okay, I'm free from that now. I can move on to think about the next thing, which is my current thing. I'm like, I need to be working on this. And I carry a notepad everywhere, and I do a lot of jottings. If people think I'm taking notes to remember for later, I'm taking notes oftentimes to forget. Getting what's off my mind but isn't the present moment, so I can stay fixated where I'm at, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. It only takes us a minute, but I'd say jot that stuff down. It might free your attention. You can always come back to it afterwards and not risk that you forgot something you were thinking about it.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I think that's pretty much it for this meeting. I mean, I'm pretty stoked. I'm pretty happy about it. I have it all recorded, so I can always go back over it and listen to it.
Sweet.
Which is pretty sweet. We'll figure out where we're going to post it out after this, after we stop the recording.
Okay.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I guess do your outro, and then yeah.
Sure. So again, this is Chris DeLeon for HobbyGameDev.com. This has been a call. We've been talking through Charles Zamet's goals and situation related to video game development in terms of where he's at. As preparation for a call we'll be having as a follow-up in a couple months as part of his investment in the HobbyGameDev Kit and as a method to making games and getting better at making kind of games in your own time with zero to low budget for the kind of games you're working on at first.